Have you ever wondered how many bodies America hides beneath its rivers? How many stories have sunk to the bottom, never to resurface except in the form of whispers and rumors? Imagine this. Young men strong, healthy, full of life, vanish after a night out with friends. A day later, maybe two, their bodies are found drifting in icy water. Police call it an accident, too much drinking, wrong place, wrong time. But over and over again, in city after city, the same thing appears. Near the drowning sites, spray painted on walls, tunnels, or bridge underpasses. A crude smiley face, always watching, always grinning. Some call it coincidence. Others say it the work of a serial killer. And there are those who believe it's something much darker. A group that hides in plain sight, choosing victims not by chance, but by ritual. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about the case that made me believe. A case that will make you think twice before walking alone at night, especially near water. It started in the winter of 2001, in Minneapolis. 21-year-old Chris Jenkins was last seen leaving a downtown bar on Halloween night. He was dressed in a Native American costume, fringe jacket, moccasins, the works. He'd been drinking, yes, but friends said he wasn't stumbling or out of control. At midnight, the bouncer kicked him out, claiming Chris was causing trouble. His friends never saw him again. 4 months later, his body was pulled from the Mississippi River. The medical examiner ruled it an accidental drowning. But something didn't sit right. His arms were crossed over his chest, almost as if placed there. His shoes were still clean. His costume was intact, not ripped the way clothing usually is after months in a river. His family pushed for answers, but authorities dismissed them. Just another drunk college kid who fell in. But then, not far from where Chris was last seen, investigators found it. A crudely painted yellow smiley face on a wall near the riverbank. Nobody thought much of it at first. Graffiti is everywhere in a city, but when private detectives started connecting the dots years later, that face took on a new meaning. Because Chris wasn't the only one. 2 years later, in La Crosse, Wisconsin, a student named Jared was celebrating his 20th birthday with friends. He disappeared after leaving a bar alone. The next morning, his body was found floating in the Mississippi. Same explanation. He drank too much. He fell. Police were quick to close the case. But near the spot where his body surfaced, there it was. Again, smiley face. Different color, different size, but unmistakable. A wide, eerie grin staring out at the water. By now, whispers had started. Parents of the victims formed groups, demanding answers. They noticed patterns. The victims were almost always young men, athletes or students, often described as smart, popular, or strong swimmers. The drownings happened in clusters across multiple states: Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, Ohio, even New York. And the smiley face graffiti kept turning up like a signature. Still, the authorities refused to connect the cases. Coincidence, they said. College towns, alcohol rivers, it happens. But how many coincidences does it take before it becomes a pattern? The most disturbing part came when retired NYPD detectives Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte began investigating. They reviewed dozens of cases. One detail chilled them. Many of the victims' bodies showed signs of being held somewhere before being dumped in the water. Their blood alcohol levels didn't match the timelines. Some had unexplained marks, bruises that didn't fit drowning. It was as if someone was abducting them, keeping them alive for a time, and then discarding them like trash. That's when the theory of the Smiley Face Killers was born. But theories don't ease the grief of parents. They don't quiet the nightmares of survivors. And they don't explain why. Even today, the drownings haven't stopped. I'll never forget the night I walked along the Milwaukee River, researching one of these cases. It was bitter cold, the kind of night when the water looks like black glass. On the underpass of a bridge, faded but visible, was that same childlike grin. Someone had scrawled it there years ago. But I swear to you, it felt fresh, like it was waiting for someone to notice. What unsettled me most wasn't the graffiti itself. It was the sound I thought I heard while staring at it, the faint echo of laughter. Not joyful laughter, but mocking. The kind of laughter that makes the hairs on the back of your neck rise. I left that place fast, but the image of the painted face followed me into my dreams. Some say it's all urban legend, a conspiracy stitched together by grieving families and imaginative detectives. But tell that to the dozens of mothers who buried their sons without answers. Tell that to the witnesses who swear they saw strange men lingering near the rivers on the nights of disappearances. Tell that to the empty eyes of the smiley faces, staring from the shadows, as if daring you to keep walking. And so, the question remains. Are the Smiley Face Murders the work of a single deranged killer, a cult operating under police radar, or something even worse, an unseen force pulling young men into the water, leaving behind its mocking grin as a taunt to the living? Whatever the truth is, the story doesn't end here. In fact, this is only the beginning. Because in the spring of 2006, another young man vanished after a night of drinking. His name was Tommy. And what happened to him would shatter everything I thought I knew about coincidence. Tommy was 22, a senior at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He was the kind of guy parents bragged about: good grades, captain of the rowing team, handsome in a clean-cut, Midwestern way. His friends described him as disciplined, the type who never lost control, even after a few drinks. On the night of March 17, 2006, St. Patrick's Day, Tommy went out with friends to celebrate. They started at a crowded Irish pub, and witnesses remembered seeing him laughing, raising his glass, dressed in a green hoodie and jeans. By midnight, the group had scattered. Some went home. Some lingered. But Tommy, he never made it back. 2 days later, his body was found floating near a bend in the Yahara River. The police explanation was quick and familiar: intoxication and accidental drowning. They said he must have wandered off drunk, slipped and fallen into the water. Case closed. But once again, the details didn't add up. Tommy's body showed minimal signs of decomposition, even though he'd been missing for nearly 48 hours. His lungs contained less water than expected in a drowning victim. His blood alcohol level was strangely low for someone who had supposedly been drinking heavily all night. And then there were the marks on his wrists, faint, but they're restraint marks. When his parents pressed investigators, they were told they were imagining things. "You're in denial," the coroner said. "You don't want to accept that your son was drunk and careless." But Tommy's mother didn't buy it. She remembered him calling her at 11:30 that night. His voice had been steady, almost too steady, as if he were reading from a script. He said he'd be home soon. She swears she heard another voice in the background, a man's voice, low and calm, whispering something she couldn't make out. And then, a week later, just a few blocks from where Tommy's body was pulled, a new piece of graffiti appeared on a concrete wall near the water. Not just one smiley face this time, but 3, each one slightly different, like variations of the same mocking expression. Detectives Gannon and Duarte heard about Tommy's case and flew out to Wisconsin. They met his parents, combed the scene, and reviewed police reports. The more they looked, the stranger it became. One bartender swore Tommy left the bar with a man he didn't recognize. He described him as tall, with pale skin and light hair, wearing a dark coat. No one else seemed to notice this man. The bar had no working cameras that night. Convenient. Another witness, a homeless man who camped near the river, told investigators he saw 2 men carrying something heavy down toward the water around 3 a.m. He thought it was a bundle of trash, until he noticed a shoe fall out of the tarp. He yelled at them, but they kept moving quickly and vanished into the darkness. When police questioned him later, they dismissed him as unreliable. But Gannon and Duarte believed him. They'd heard too many similar stories in other cities. By now, the Smiley Face Killer theory was gaining attention online. Forums buzzed with speculation about a network of killers, maybe a cult, targeting young men across the Midwest. Some believed it was ritualistic and offering to something lurking in the rivers. Others thought it was coordinated thrill killing, the graffiti acting as a calling card. Tommy's case lit a fire under the theory because it was too perfect, too staged. His body, his blood, even his last phone call felt like pieces of a carefully constructed puzzle. And that's when I started to realize something. This wasn't just about murder. It was about control. Whoever or whatever was behind this didn't just want their victims dead. They wanted them silenced, erased, turned into statistics, drowned in alcohol and carelessness. But the problem with patterns is that once you see them, you can't unsee them. And patterns have a way of leading you down dark paths. In May of that same year, 2 months after Tommy's death, another young man disappeared from Minneapolis. His name was Eric. Same age, same story. He left a party near campus, last seen walking toward the river. His body was discovered days later, floating under a bridge. And on that bridge, someone had scrawled a fresh, smiley face. Only this one wasn't smiling. The mouth was jagged, turned downward into something between a grin and a scream. When Eric's parents looked into his case, they found something even more disturbing. His credit card had been used after his death. Small charges at gas stations along the interstate. Police brushed it off as a stolen wallet, but it raised a terrifying possibility that his killers hadn't acted alone. That they were moving, traveling, spreading. Late one night, I spoke to one of the detectives privately. His voice shook as he told me what he really thought. "These kids aren't drowning," he said. "They're being hunted. Someone's taking them, holding them, and then dumping them when they're done. The water hides everything. The graffiti, that's just them laughing at us." I asked him why the FBI hadn't stepped in if this was truly organized. He went quiet for a long time before finally answering. "Maybe they don't want to. Maybe they already know who's behind it." That stuck with me, because by now, the drownings numbered in the dozens. Different states, different cities, but the same story, the same eerie grin left behind. It was impossible to ignore, unless, of course, someone wanted it ignored. And yet, despite the growing evidence, every official report still used the same words. Accidental drowning. No foul play suspected. But tell me, how many accidents does it take before you start calling it murder? The summer after Tommy's death, another young man disappeared. His case would bring the nightmare even closer. Because unlike the others, this time there was a witness who survived. And what he saw that night changed everything. It happened in the summer of 2007 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His name was Alex, 21 years old, a computer science major, shy but brilliant, not the type to get into trouble. He was walking back from a friend's apartment late at night. He hadn't been drinking heavily, just a couple of beers. It should have been a quiet, uneventful walk. But Alex didn't make it home. For 2 days his friends and family searched frantically. Then, against all odds, he was found alive. Not in the river, not at the morgue, but staggering through a wooded area on the edge of town. Barefoot, clothes damp and torn. He was disoriented, trembling, and could barely remember his name. Doctors said he was suffering from dehydration, shock, and something else they couldn't quite explain. His blood work showed traces of a powerful sedative, not alcohol. And when he finally began to talk, what he described sent chills through everyone who heard it. Alex said he'd been walking home when a van pulled up beside him. At first, he thought it was just someone asking for directions. But the window rolled down, and before he could react, a cloth was pressed over his face. The next thing he remembered, he was in darkness. He described being in a cold, damp place. He thought, maybe a basement. He could hear water dripping. He was tied to a chair. Around him were voices, at least 3 men. They spoke quietly, almost like they were reciting something. He couldn't see their faces because they wore masks. Not ordinary masks, but crude, hand-painted ones. And each mask had the same feature. A smiley face, black and white, twisted into different shapes of mockery. They asked him questions he didn't understand. Questions about his family, his fears, even about his faith. When he didn't answer, they laughed. One of them whispered in his ear, "Don't worry, you'll be with the river soon." At some point, he blacked out again. He woke up soaked, lying on the muddy bank near the river. The rope's gone. He staggered into the woods, where someone eventually found him. The police. They didn't believe a word of it. They said Alex was hallucinating. That maybe he'd taken drugs without knowing. They filed no report of kidnapping. They didn't connect it to the other drownings. But Gannon and Duarte did. They interviewed Alex personally. They believed him. And what Alex described fit the theory too perfectly. Victims abducted, held somewhere, interrogated or toyed with, then dumped into rivers to cover the tracks. The smiley faces. Not random graffiti at all, but a calling card, a ritual, maybe even a warning. The idea of a cult began to take shape. Not just one killer, but a network. Men across different states, working in unison, choosing their victims carefully. They weren't sloppy drunks, they were targeted. Intelligent, athletic, healthy young men prime. Sacrifices for something sinister. What chilled me was Alex's description of the masks. He said they weren't childish or goofy, the way graffiti might suggest. They were grotesque, exaggerated smiles, painted thick, the kind that seemed to stretch too wide, too unnatural. One mask, he swore, had real teeth glued onto it. When he told his story publicly, people online tore him apart. Attention seeker, paranoid, another drunk college kid making excuses. But there was one detail that couldn't be ignored. The spot where Alex said he was left, spray painted on the wall nearby, was another smiley face. Fresh, black, dripping. The survivor's story sent shivers through every parent who had lost a son to the rivers. They now had proofs someone was behind this. Yet, authorities doubled down, calling it urban legend. Mess, hysteria. I started digging myself. The more I looked, the more I saw patterns. In city after city, the drowning spiked around holidays, Halloween, St. Patrick's Day, graduation season. Nights when bars overflowed with young men. Nights when no one would notice one person vanishing into the dark. And the rivers, they weren't random either. Many of them were near tunnels, underpasses, storm drains, places where graffiti could be left unseen, where a van could pull up unnoticed. But the worst discovery was something hidden in plain sight. On an online forum, buried in the threads about conspiracies, I found an account that claimed to belong to one of the killers. The posts were cryptic, written like poetry, but they carried the same theme. The water accepts, the water hides, the smile is the mark. One post in particular still haunts me. It read, "They call us killers. We are cleaners. We deliver them to the current, and the current takes them away. Our faces smile because there's never will again." Was it a hoax? Maybe. But days after that post appeared, another body turned up in the Ohio River. A college student, athletic, bright future, and yes, near the bridge, another smiley face was waiting. The more I learned, the more I realized this wasn't just crime, it was theater. It was ritual. Whoever was behind it wanted us to see the faces, to feel the dread, to know they were laughing at us. Alex, the survivor, moved far away after his ordeal. He refused to go near rivers again. But, in his final interview, he said something that made my blood run cold. "They let me go," he whispered. "They told me I wasn't ready yet, that the river would call me back when it was time." When I asked him what he meant, he just shook his head and stared at the floor. He never spoke of it again. And then, just a year later, another body surfaced in the same city. A young man who looked eerily like Alex. The police said it was an accident. But painted on the wall near where the body was found was a smiley face unlike the others. This one had two faces, one smiling, one crying. The message was clear. They were watching, and they weren't finished. By 2010, the smiley face theory had spread beyond whispers. Parents, private investigators, even journalists were starting to connect the dots. Over 70 cases of young men drowned under suspicious circumstances, almost all written off as accidents. And near dozens of those sites, the painted grins remained, fading, but still there, like ghosts that refused to leave. The FBI issued a statement calling the theory not credible. They said there was no evidence of serial killers, no proof of foul play. But the more they denied it, the louder the theory grew. Families weren't buying the drunk college kid explanation anymore. Too many details didn't fit. And then, I made my own mistake. I went looking. It was a freezing January night in Chicago when I decided to follow a lead. A student named Daniel had disappeared a week earlier after leaving a bar near the riverfront. Police were already preparing their standard report. Intoxicated, wandered too close to the water. But Daniel's roommate told me something strange. He received a text from Daniel's phone at 3:07 a.m. The message only said, "Smile." That was hours after Daniel was last seen. I walked along the river, the air biting at my face, my flashlight beam trembling on the concrete walls. And there it was, fresh, pain, a yellow smiley face, dripping, eyes uneven, mouth curling too wide. I stepped closer, and for the first time, I noticed something else beneath it. Faint scratches, etched into the wall. Almost hidden numbers. A date, the date of another drowning in the same city 10 years earlier. That's when I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the shadows under the bridge. I froze, heart hammering. A figure emerged all hooded, face hidden. He didn't say a word, just stood there, staring. Then, with one gloved hand, he raised a spray can and shook it, the rattle echoing in the silence. I backed away, and he laughed. Not loudly, not theatrically, just a low chuckle, enough to let me know he wasn't afraid of being seen. Before I could move, another figure appeared behind him, then another. 3 in total. Each one wore a mask, white, crude, with black painted smiles. I ran. I didn't care about the ice under my feet, didn't care about the river inches away. I ran until my lungs burned. When I finally looked back, they were gone. But the laughter, I could still hear it. 2 days later, Daniel's body was pulled from the water. Police called it an accident. His phone was never recovered. After that, I stopped chasing them. I knew too much. I knew enough to understand that this wasn't about one city or one killer. This was a web, a group that spanned states, maybe decades, working silently, choosing carefully. And yet, there's something deeper here, something I can't shake. The rivers. Why always the rivers? Why not leave bodies on the street, in alleys, in fields? Why water? Some say it's practical. The water erases evidence, confuses timelines, destroys DNA. But others believe it's symbolic, ancient. That water isn't just a hiding place, but an offering. That these young men aren't just victims, but sacrifices. And the smiley face. Not a joke, not a taunt, but a sigil. A mark of allegiance to something older than we understand. I don't know which explanation is worse. Even now, years later, the drownings haven't stopped. Just last winter, another young man vanished in Boston. He was found in the Charles River 3 days later. The news cycle barely covered it. But a jogger swears she saw fresh graffiti on the bridge that week. You already know what it was. Sometimes, late at night, I think about Alex the survivor. I wonder if he was right, if they let him go on purpose, if he was marked. If we all are. Because here's the truth. Once you start seeing the smiley faces, you can't stop. You notice them everywhere, on bridge pylons, tunnel walls, underpasses by dark rivers. Some are old, some fresh, some laughing, some crying, but always there, always waiting. And when you do notice, you can't help but feel that something has noticed you back. Maybe it's just a legend. Maybe it's just grieving families piecing together coincidences. Maybe. But the next time you're out late, walking home, and you hear the faint hiss of spray paint, the rattle of a can in the dark, don't look back. Because if you see the smile, it's already too late. The rivers will take you, and the faces will laugh. Forever.